To say that my name is Kinyora Parham, and I serve as the Executive Director of NRAPE on campus. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar, EROC or NRAPE on campus, our mission is to end campus sexual violence through three pillars. That's support for survivors in their communities, prevention through education, and policy reform on the campus, local, state, and federal levels. For EROC, our framework is about centering the margins, which simply means that we aim to address and fill the disparity of resources between different communities with the intention of centering historically excluded and systemically marginalized student survivors. As some of you may know, it is Sexual Assault Awareness and Action Month, and today's conversation, Parents' Perspective, addressing campus sexual assault and protecting students with disabilities, is a very important one. For those of you who may be unaware, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 5 trans and gender nonconforming students, and 1 in 16 men will be sexually assaulted during their time at college. We also know that students with neurodivergence and or a disability are twice as likely to experience sexual violence than those who may not have a neurodivergence or a disability. Oftentimes in this movement, students with disabilities are also referred to as the hidden survivors. And so today, we will hear from 2 of our special guests about the importance of addressing campus sexual assault and what it means to ensure that students with disabilities are seen, heard, and believed. I will introduce them momentarily, but first I'd like to just set some housekeeping rules for those who are joining with us. Since this is a webinar, your videos have been turned off. However, please feel free to use the chat to engage with us, to engage with each other, especially throughout this conversation. This is a space for you all to ask questions, so please don't feel shy. If you wish to engage with us via social media, to share any gems that you may hear throughout the course of this conversation, words of advice, or just anything you want to share, especially via Twitter or Facebook, please be sure to use our handles that I've dropped in the chat box for you. This conversation, as you may be able to tell, is being recorded, and it will be added to our social platforms for later reference, and we'll make that available via email as well. One other quick note I want to make is that EROC, we hold the right to remove anyone who Zoom bombs or displays any victim blaming behavior. There is no tolerance for any type of violent attacks or rhetoric or references of any kind on this call. And with that said, we will be speaking about sexual assault, of course. And so please take time for yourself. If you need to step away, please feel free to do so. Please take care of yourself. And for parents of students, survivors, and to student survivors of campus sexual assault, I want you to know that you are not alone. We see you, we hear you, and we believe you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our fellow guests. And I'll start with Georgie. Georgie Palafox is the CEO and co-founder of Exceptional Heroes, a multi-sensory mental health and wellness company. Its patent-pending therapeutic devices assist with various treatments and approaches supporting a broad spectrum of mental, emotional, and neurodevelopmental conditions. As a serial entrepreneur and a top-level executive with 25+ years of experience in business, real estate, and mortgage corporations, Georgie has a proven success track of market expansion, product development, and spearheading change in business operations. Georgie, along with her daughter, Savannah Palafox, creator and co-founder of Exceptional Heroes, advocates for sexual assault survivors, parents of sexual assault survivors, and individuals with visible and invisible disabilities. Welcome, Georgie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you all.
Absolutely. Our next guest is Susan B. Sorensen. Professor Susan B. Sorensen has a unique interdisciplinary background in epidemiology, sociology, and psychology. Professor of Social Policy, Professor of Health and Science Societies, and Senior Fellow in Public Health. She moved to Pennsylvania in 2006 after more than 20 years at UCLA's School of Public Health. For over a decade, she was the faculty director of the Ortner Center on Violence and Abuse at UPenn. With over 150 publications to her credit, Professor Sorensen publishes widely in the epidemiology and prevention of violence, including areas of homicide, suicide, sexual assault, child abuse, battering, and firearms. She helped establish violence against women as a public health issue and furthered the study of firearms as a consumer product. Her recent publications include After Campus Sexual Assault, a guide for parents. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be engaging in this conversation with both of you. And just first off, just want to say, like, how are you? How are you both doing?
Susan?
Doing great today.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm stable and I'm surrounded by love and trying to absorb positive energy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Georgie, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit more about Exceptional Heroes. What or who was the inspiration behind it?
So Exceptional Heroes is definitely, it's a company of love. It was founded by my daughter, Savannah Palafox, and it was after she came home from her assault. Savannah has a list of disabilities prior to her assault, seizure disorder, and a few other disabilities that I'm okay to say because she publicly has put it out there for others on her platform. And Savannah has a seizure disorder, and so she designed this concept because she used to carry around what we call a safety backpack. And right after when she came home from her assault, her seizure disorder heightened. Some of the disabilities that came after it, PTSD, trauma, that heightened. And so she would carry along breathing, she would have breathing apps and stress balls and medications and all of these fidgets and things that what we put in her safety backpack. And she discovered this, why can't I combine everything into one? And she developed our multi-sensory therapeutic companions. Here's these guys behind me. And so they incorporate 5 of the 7 senses, and they're used for anxiety, stress, and individuals with both visible and invisible disabilities and any neurodevelopmental conditions. And so we're building it out. She was the inspiration behind it. And so we started developing, and when COVID hit, I was one of those people impacted, being in mortgage. And so we had already been through the journey part-time with Exceptional Heroes. And I just said, this is the perfect time to go all in. So because with right now with anxiety heightened and stress and anxiety and no one knowing, and now we're in a country shut down or world shut down, something like this is needed. And so we got started on that, and we started working also on our mission on our platform on just raising awareness in various disabilities. And so that's what we're doing, and that's what Exceptional Heroes is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Georgie. For Susan, let's talk a little bit about After Campus Sexual Assault, the guide for parents. Particularly in the introduction, you start off by stating, this is not a book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book about the end of sexual violence, how views of women have changed so much that sexual assault is rare, but that's not a book anyone can write. You're speaking to parents as you write this, and I'm also assuming others, right? You know, what did you mean as you were writing these opening lines?
Yes, I'm speaking to everybody. And it's partly because I've spent my career working around these issues. And I think with the energy and enthusiasm of a young person, I was like, if we can do this, we can change this, we can make this non-existent for women. Women should be able to be safe. It shouldn't be something that we have to deal with in our homes, in our streets, in our relationships. And I clearly underestimated the roots. I clearly underestimated how views of women and sort of male entitlement and the sense that it's just going to take a long time And so I at first thought it was sort of a sprint, and was thinking of a marathon in terms of my own life, but I think it's a marathon that goes on across generations. And I'm hoping somebody can write that book about the end to sexual assault and sexual violence someday. But it hasn't happened yet.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm waiting for that day as well. I hope it doesn't take a whole another generation to do so. But I do feel that we are hopefully making the right steps towards doing just that. And maybe one day we can write that book. Georgie, back to you a little bit. After you found out about Savannah, particularly, what's the first thing you remember doing, saying?
I did everything wrong. I'm going to tell you. So when it first happened, it was a phone call because I had gotten a notification about her grades and attendance, and mainly grades because I was joined on her university as her second year. And so I called her and we got into a bit of an argument because I was like, what's happening? This is not you. And next thing you know, my husband walks in the door to my mother's house. I was over there, happened to be over there. And he says it. He says, Savannah just called me. She doesn't know how to tell you. She was raped. And those words, like, I remember those words, and because I remember everything else went silent. And I called her up immediately, and I said, I need to get you home. And she says, Mama, and she started explaining, I need to get you home. This has happened to you. So when they say believe her or believe him, I didn't even think about it. I knew it, and so I called and I started getting, getting her airline stuff done. But when I hung up with her of course it was a longer conversation because it was shocking. And then once I said, let me hand you to Daddy, I started making phone calls to get the travel. And the first thing I did was I'm a solution solver. I'm like, how can I fix this? And it's just in my nature, that type A personality. And so the first thing I did was I called school police just to tell them this has happened on your campus. And I said, but listen, do not call my daughter because she has a disability. I said, something happened on the phone. And it wasn't until therapy months and months later that I learned that she was living, before she had told us, she was living in crisis. So that denial, which Susan could talk more about. And I didn't know that crisis is when you're in crisis, that it can last long, that you're in such a denial that you don't know, sometimes perception is off because depending on how severe the trauma was, and for Savannah it was. And then her flip, once she told us, became from crisis to trauma, reality. I said it out loud. My mom knows it happened. So it changed for her. And so it was almost like that day happened again because she told us, and that made it real. And I didn't give her a chance to tell me, don't wait till I get home. I'm not ready to say to anybody yet because this is what I've done. I've already done this. I didn't hear anything. All I knew was the act. I didn't know all the details yet. I knew she was going to be on her way home. I called the police, told them, please don't contact her. She's trying to get to the airport. She's a mess right now. I need to get her safely. She's already had a seizure. And they took down information. And next thing you know, I get a call from my daughter, hysterical, from the air. Then the stewardess got on the line and she's having tremors. She's panicking because they immediately called her. So I did everything. To me, I thought I was doing right, but I did wrong. I didn't listen first. I didn't take a second. I reacted. And then I did what I thought and I had to learn that it's not about me. It's not the I, it's about her, what she needed. And so that was my initial reaction, finding out what had happened to her. And then I, took a plunge into education of everything I needed to know as a parent.
Absolutely, Georgie. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that with us and sharing a little bit about Savannah's story. I think you did what most parents, and I'll say this, I'm not a parent yet, but I think you did what most parents would naturally do, and that is react, right? Like,
Right.
I think even for those of us, when we learn about something of our friends or even of our parents, even, especially of a traumatic situation, typically our normal reaction to do is to react.
Yeah.
And so, but I think you also took the time to process what that reaction looked like. And then, came to the understanding that, yes, I actually probably shouldn't have done it that way.
Yes.
And if anything, took to your conversations with Savannah in terms of understanding what it was that she needed, and that at the end. And Susan, I know you've spoken to a lot of parents about, getting and giving and getting the news, and that it's not necessarily important or only important about the how, but also like when it matters. Can you share a little bit more on what that looks like, in terms of your research with other parents when they've come to, oh wow, this happened to my child, and what responses have been?
Yeah. And I want to provide just a little bit of background, because as a college professor, every semester I'd have students come and talk to me about having been sexually assaulted. And sometimes I was keenly aware that I was a stand-in for a parent, because they were sort of trying it out with me. And how was I going to react, and what were they going to hear? And then sometimes they would tell me specifically that they hadn't told their parents, and that they were really struggling with the decision about whether to tell them. And for some, the idea of telling their parents felt traumatic in a way. And some, it just sounds really bizarre, but some were managing with the assault and all of the fallout from that in a way they described as being easier than telling their parents, which I didn't necessarily expect. But as I listened, a lot of the students felt like they were going to be letting their parents down.
Oh.
Felt like they might be judged. Felt like, what am I going to do because I was drinking, and I went to a party, or I let some guy walk me home that I didn't really know, and or it depends upon, there's a lot of cultural differences. So like, I've been dating and we're not supposed to date. And so how can I tell my parents? I can't tell my parents. So the assault itself got linked with all of these other sorts of things and all of these shoulds that they had been told, because I think a lot of times parents, and I'm a parent of a very recent college graduate, of thinking that if we just give our kid the rules, and if we just figure out the right rules, it's going to be okay. But what happens, particularly in campus sexual assault, is that some of those rules get broken. And then your kid is very hesitant to say, look, I broke rules and you were right, something bad would happen, and it did. And so they feel guilty and responsible to the parents for having broken those rules that they're inculcated with. But to me, it's when a parent is told, and it might not feel like it at the time, but it's a gift. It's a gift, because your child wants you to know about something so important in their lives. A lot of the students who I talked to in preparation for working on my book hadn't told their parents. And some of them planned never to tell their parents. And one of the things I did notice, kind of circling back to your question, is that the difficulty of telling and also the reactions that they received and what they wanted from their parents varied on when they told them. So they told them like right away, which sounds like, which happened with you in Savannah, Georgie, relatively shortly after the incident. It's a crisis. It's a crisis for the the victim. And I am using the term victim because somebody has been harmed. Somebody's been victimized. She survived in terms of she's still alive, but that becoming a survivor is a process. So I do use the term victim. I think it's a fair term and an appropriate term, particularly in that beginning phase. So if they call right away, it's because she wants help. She needs something. She's stressed. She might be reaching out, simply wanting the firm foundation that the family can provide, in a sense that things will continue on. All of it, we lived through COVID, and we want, well, not quite through it, but in those opening phases of COVID, we were like, oh my God, are things going to be the same? Is it going to be okay? And it's that's a small sense of what it's like for a victim. Can I come back? Can I be okay? Can I be with my family again? I need that foundation. I need that strength. And so, and maybe they need help with problem solving. Maybe they need to make decisions about whether to come home, whether to call the police, what to do, how to handle classes, things like that. Most of the students who spoke with me when I was working on the book waited. And
My daughter did, though. Yeah, she didn't tell me right away. It was several months of her just, I didn't even know, like when she would call us, she would clean herself up so that, and then she had a part of the room so we didn't see that, you know, because she had become a hermit in her room, like she explains in some of her postings, is that she became a hermit. It wasn't that she didn't want to tell us, as we've, you know, been years of therapy, her therapist explained, it was that she still was in disbelief, that crisis. And so for her, even though she saw us a couple of times between those months, part of her wanted to, but part of her, it was the crisis part that was saying, no, it probably didn't happen. It was a nightmare. It's a horrible nightmare that I keep reliving. And then because if she said it out loud, she knew that the minute she said it out loud, it's real. Yeah. And, you know, and you said something about, Susan, about some of the kids don't say anything because they're worried what their parents, like they were right. They shouldn't have gone to a party. There is no right. You know, you can tell your kids, don't drink from an open cup. Get your, have that safety companion, know your surroundings, know your limit, don't walk that alley by yourselves. But if something happens, that's where, like Savannah and I have been working with others, is that if it happens, it doesn't mean whoever told you don't do it was right and you were wrong and you deserve that, or you got that because of that. You shouldn't have gotten that anyways. You should have been able to walk down that aisle, that alley. You should have been able to wear that outfit. You should have been able to drink your drink and know that it was safe and nobody did anything to you. And so that's where, like, we if you have that parent or even parental person, it doesn't have to be your actual person. It could be your professor, your grandparent, your friend's mom. Sometimes, we try to explain is that sometimes it's just good to purge it. Just say it. And you could say, I want nothing done. I just want to purge. And then let me take a breath, and then I'll decide what next. And, but that's a lot we hear too, is that, I didn't tell my parents because they were right. No, don't, because you already have enough pressure on your back of what has happened to you, and you're already trying to find your next breath. That's the one thing that I have learned with Savannah, is that, she just wants, for years, she wanted to find that girl prior, the day before. She says, I just want to find the girl the day before, because the day before she had no fears. She had no type of trauma besides her disabilities that she was born with and that she developed. But she's like she says, I had a very happy childhood, happy life. I didn't know, I relied everything on faith, if I put my faith in something. And so it says that if I say a name, if I say a statement, nothing can happen to me. And there is ugly in the world and things do happen. And so it's trying to find the joy in the new life, because sometimes you're not going to be able to go back. You just have to learn, because there are going to be safety measures that you put in place. And that's safety, not necessarily carrying pepper spray. It's safety measures for your own mental safety. I'm with my family at the barbecue and I'm okay. I'm, at the supermarket, I have, I'm okay, and it's just little things. And so, I do see with I say children because they're little, but but it could be adults that are assaulted on campus as well, or out of campus, and or professors. People forget that older people can get assaulted also by students, and but I think that the struggles to say it out loud is because it makes it real.
Absolutely.
And that's the hardest thing, because it's not real for them. A lot of times you think it's because what they're going to think of you, but it's really, it just made it real. It made it, it made it heavy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A couple of things that are coming to my mind as both of you were talking, especially when it comes to, receiving the news, or because I'm a survivor myself, and sometimes I think back to, why I didn't tell my mom at the time, or what happened to me. And I like to think that from a cultural perspective too, right? Like, there's that code of silence that exists. There's that, we just don't talk about it, and, in our communities, because that's just not the thing to do. Whereas my mom actually was someone who was like, look, if anything ever happens to you, I would want to know. But I know I didn't say anything, and it took me a while to process. And that was because I wanted to actually protect my mom from reliving her own trauma. And not necessarily about for me, and wasn't really thinking about myself necessarily, but more so about my mom. And so I often wonder, around like the misconceptions too that some folks may have in terms of survivors who do come forward, and the reasons why they don't. Oftentimes, yes, it is because of the fear. It is because of, the victim blaming that happens. It is because of the shame that folks like to project upon survivors. But also at times it is because we simply are thinking about, the emotions and feelings of our parents or other loved ones who have raised us, because we're trying to protect them from that trauma, and not probably even realizing it's vicarious trauma that we might place upon them. We may not even have the words to describe that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that's one of the things that I saw when people waited a few months. It was because they wanted to protect their parents.
Absolutely.
The statement was like, they weren't there. It happened. There's nothing they can do right now. I'm going to do my best to deal with it. Maybe I'll tell them sometime, maybe I won't. But and if they did wait several months and then did tell them, sometimes the initial reaction was different. It was like, why didn't you tell us beforehand? Why didn't you tell us sooner? And then that became the focus for a while, because then the parents were feeling betrayed, or maybe you didn't trust me, or you didn't want this, or you didn't want that. And then that became the focus for a while. And then that was hard for the survivor, who was trying to share that piece of information that was so important for them. And so that was something that needed to be worked through with the parent and the student at that point in time. Yeah, and sometimes students know about the history of their parents. They know about the history of that their mom has been assaulted. And based on what we know about the rates of sexual assault in the country, we know that there's a lot of assaulted moms out there. And students were very clear that they wanted to protect their mom and not open up that wound for her again, too. And so there's many layers on this. And so while there's sort of some general things that I think we can talk about in terms of recovery, or general things that we can talk about with parents, and reactions, you know, there's going to be lots of variation. And one thing I always say is that whatever your first reaction is, it's probably a mixed one. And it's probably not terribly supportive. And in no small part because the victim feels so vulnerable, you know, that even the most well-intentioned things are going to come across as harsh, or you're trying to understand it, like what happened and then what happened, because it's unwanted news. And as human beings, we try to make sense of what we're hearing, and we want to say, well, tell me more, tell me, and then what happened? And when you're doing that, sometimes it comes across as questioning in a way that feels judgmental.
Yes.
Interrogating.
And you know, and so parents are doing what they can to figure out and process, as we all do when we process bad news. And this is not good news. This is bad news. Your kid has been harmed. But it's not helping them, because what they need is they need a parent who already knows and who has already thought about how they're going to react. But unfortunately, that's not what we get. And so it's really important as parents that we can say, I goofed up, I didn't give you what you needed at that time. And we can't start over, but can we start again? Can we try again? Because I really want to be there for you.
Absolutely. And Georgie, you know, as someone who's a parent of Savannah, she has a disability, you know, and oftentimes, you know, the way in which survivors who experience campus sexual assault or any other type of trauma may look differently than those who have a disability, whether that's visible or invisible, or maybe neurodivergent. And also for those of you who are tuning in who may not know what neurodivergence, have never heard of that term before, it was first used in 1997 by an autistic sociologist named Judy Singer. And it's essentially, simply put, when their thought patterns, behaviors, or learning styles fall outside of what is considered quote unquote normal or neurotypical. And so Savannah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Georgie, she has an auditory processing disorder and seizure disorder.
Correct.
And so the way in which she processes trauma, I would assume, looks differently than that of what has always been perceived the normal way of processing. And to be quite frank, I don't know what is normal in terms of processing trauma.
Right.
But if you could share with us a little bit more on what that process looked like for her and for you as someone who's a parent witnessing this.
So the auditory processing portion, and she got that because she was born with a hearing disability when she was born. But the auditory processing is that, you know, she, and so let's just give you a little bit of education before the assault. So, you know, she learned differently. So she needed to have it verbally said, not just written down and read. She needed to say it a little over and over and again to herself. She needed to have it in different formats as well. You know, it wasn't the typical way of learning. And so she had to adjust to that. And so after the trauma, with someone that has, you know, auditory processing disorder, and then also a seizure disorder. So, and her seizures is associated with, she has chronic migraine. So her body goes into so much pain that some people vomit, some people pass out. Her pain level exceeds that. She's been marked unconscious. We've had to call Code Blue. She's been hospitalized several times because this started in high school. And so when this happened, you know, she was having to process first off the trauma. Then we're trying to find her therapist to help her to, you know, just cope, to help me to teach her or work with her how to cope, how to heal, what's the journey like, how to understand what happened wasn't her fault, taking off guilt. You were, it was a study group, I mean, little things, because it was that I did this and I did that and I did this and I listened to here and it still happened kind of thing. And but we went through, I would say, over half a dozen therapists, because we had to find someone that fit Savannah, that understood, because they needed to understand what auditory processing is, how to counsel her. And then, on top of it, PTSD. I had never even known about PTSD for a victim. I knew PTSD with people in military. I really didn't associate that. So seeing her go from a PTSD episode, and then it just heightened everything else and go straight into seizures, not even a migraine. There was no aura. There was no signs that we normally would see prior. It just straight seizures. And so for us, trying to find a doctor that, we had to tell them that she was a survivor and a victim. We need to find a physician that she would allow to even not just touch her hand, put the light in her, put it in the ear, and in her to feel safe with that. We had to find a physician that can find her a new neurologist, because this neurologist needed to understand PTSD, trauma, and now her seizure disorder, because her medications was no longer working. She was having seizures multiple times during the day, to the fact that I was like, it's affecting her brain, and then also, she was in and out of trauma. So or not in and out of trauma, but I'm saying the PTSD episodes, that sometimes the auditory processing she wasn't processing it as fast as she used to. So with all of that, it was a very difficult learning curve. It wasn't months, it was years. This is our 3rd year, and it was learning. The first year was difficult. And I could say probably the first 12 months and the first 8 months. The first 8 months was intense. And when we finally found a therapist, it was daily discussions with this woman that took her on and said, I'm available at all times with her. And learning that, and then understanding what, trying to say, like, is this PTSD? Is this a seizure? Which came first, so that we can find all of those physicians and find all of those specialists that can help us. And it wasn't easy. It was a lot of myself and my mother doing our homework, because every time we would go to someone, they gave us a general, and they put sometimes survivors in a box, and then those with disabilities in a box, and then even those with different cultural differences in a box. So when we went to, another, we're from a Hispanic heritage, it was like, well, it's typical in a Hispanic family. I'm like, it wasn't a family member. I had to explain that, because typically it is a family member. Unfortunately, I'm a survivor. And I'm like, it's not, it was at her school. And then, right away, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you call this? Did you do that? And Savannah's getting hit with this, not allowing herself to process. They're not allowing her process. So it just it was a very difficult, but it was a lot of homework and learning. And then sometimes it was like, you know what? I'm going to have to be that specialist. I'm going to have to learn that until I can find that person that I can trust my daughter with, because I've done it a couple of times and it didn't work out. So I had to learn it. I had to read the books out there for parents and read the books out. And then you get unsolicited advice. Unsolicited advice, because it's from people, that, I don't know how many times I got handed Elizabeth Smart's book. Read this. This will help you. No, it's no. And if anything, you're going to make me go into trauma.
Yes.
And then generalizing also. So that was difficult. It was just trying to, like, get people to understand, because I mean, I'll never know what it's like to lose a daughter to a car accident or to an illness. So I can't give advice on that.
Absolutely.
So for my daughter and her, I can only give advice if they have all of those same symptoms. So I don't give advice. I just say, this is what I did for Savannah. This is what worked for Savannah. And here's resources so you can find for A, B, or C child.
Absolutely. And I just want to take a second here too to say to folks, if you have any questions that you have for Suzanne, Georgie, or myself, please feel free to place them in the chat box. We definitely want to hear some of your thoughts on the conversation thus far. But one thing I wanted to say too, that I think you're stating ever so clearly, but what I just want to reiterate is that survivors who experience in their experiences during and following sexual assault are not monolithic. And I think that's what people don't understand, is that there is no one perfect sexual assault. There's no perfect victim. There's no perfect way of processing trauma. There's no, here's a book that's going to help you get through it. If anything, there's going to be several books,
Yes.
several therapy sessions, or several
Yes.
therapists sometimes that you have to find, because you have to find the right person. There's going to be several different things that one is going to have to look for, because everyone's way of processing and dealing with the trauma is going to be different. And so that's one thing I want to implore here for folks who are tuning in, is that, like Georgie, you have to figure out what is it that works for your child? What is it that works for also you yourself as a parent, and the trauma that you're experiencing, whether that's vicarious trauma, like secondary trauma, or other things that may pop up for you in terms of your own self-care. And then we're coming up with the last 10 minutes of our conversation, but one of the things, particularly for you, Susan, that you talk about too, is, you intentionally write about and write a chapter to parents, like mother, fathers, and their different ways of, coping mechanisms that they've either used knowingly or unknowingly. Can you share some examples from both perspectives on what types of coping mechanisms they've used to also help, as parents?
Yeah. The parents who spoke with me, most commonly the dads, even if they thought themselves as really enlightened 21st century men, wanted to beat the crap out of the guy. They were so angry. They were so furious. And that's what came forward. And they themselves were surprised at it sometimes. And that remained, for many of them, the dominant emotion, even years later. And the mothers tended to identify with the victims and the sense of vulnerability. And also, mothers oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes are sort of the emotional center in a family. And so the moms would do a lot of caretaking of everybody else in the family as well, and making sure that their child was taken care of, making sure that the spouse was managing okay. And it's like, okay, you can tell me that stuff, but don't you dare say that to her. You will crush her. You might think that, you might feel that, but no, you can't say that to her. Or how are the siblings doing? How is this going on? And in my experience, in contrast to what you're saying, Georgie, most of the parents struggled by themselves. They didn't talk to other parents. They weren't necessarily out there seeking professional help. They were trying to figure it out themselves. And so they ended up really isolated, which is partly why I wrote the book, because I felt like we have, by federal law, colleges and universities are supposed to provide support and services and prevention programming around campus sexual assault. But colleges and universities generally treat it as if, okay, we got them, parents stay away. And they don't necessarily see parents as part of the larger social support network. And they aren't always, okay? Sometimes they can bring their own sets of problems. I get that. But parents often want to be supportive of their child. And so it's trying to figure out how to do that. And mothers and fathers have different roles sometimes. And sometimes the best that fathers can do is to be a good support to the mother as she's checking out, as you described, Georgie, you know, check out, what about this therapist and this neurologist and this, while you're doing the executive functions of trying to coordinate all the different things. You're the general contractor for building a new life, you know?
Yeah.
And so
You said something.
it's
though, about
important that they
siblings.
work together and they
Yes.
not work in isolation.
You said something about like the siblings too, like as far as a parent goes. You're right too. That was one thing, because she did have a younger sister, and it was very difficult because she immediately, you know, at 16, her world was exposed to such evil, and you know, and inflicted upon her own family, her own sister. And so, you know, for Mackenzie, you know, it was, for me, you know, I was constantly making sure Savannah and finding all those resources. And then I'm like, and Mackenzie, don't forget Mackenzie, Georgie, you know, you got to show that equal, you know, and, you know, it wasn't until, you know, months in that when we found Somi, Savannah's therapist, and she said, so Mom, what are you doing for you? And I'm like, I'm good. And she's like, yeah, like, no, you're not.
Mhm.
You know, you need to take care of you. And I said, I don't have time for me right now. I'm trying to make sure my husband, you know, stays calm because he's, you know, a wreck. And, you know, as far as not, you know, emotional, but like, you know, again, I want to find him, you know, kind of deal. And then my daughter's okay. And then, you know, so, I have to say though, I live in a village, you know, my sister lives a mile away. My parents live down the street. My other sister, it did take a village because, when my load was heavy, I know I didn't need anybody to solve it, but just give me a second to just, I either want to scream or cry, you know, or just let me play the music so loud because I just need that moment.
Yeah.
And then so I could catch my breath again. And that's where, you know, for a parent, it's like, you know, have grace on yourself. Give yourself some grace, because doing so much and showing them so much doesn't tell them that because I'm doing all of this, that's how much I love you. That's how much I'm sorry this happened to you. They know that just by sitting with them, stroking their hair, and put on a movie and just say, I'm just going to be here. I'm not going to speak. We're going to watch Will and Grace. We're going to laugh. We're not going to do nothing. You know, we're going to get some yogurt or frozen yogurt and whatever, and just be here. And, you know, and just finding that, because I know that I had tend to put a lot of pressure on myself that I didn't have to. I just did it. And, it took Somi just like grabbing me and saying, pull back, you know, and it wasn't until, you know, and I'm saying grab, but that gentle, like, what about you? I was running that I didn't even think I had any emotions. And that's when I felt it, it was like, okay, now let me take a moment. I saw a question.
Yes, I was actually going to get to that because I noticed, Georgie, you're talking a lot about how much you had to do on your own as a parent. And because, you know, a lot of what we're talking about too is campus sexual assault.
Yep.
And, you know, what happened to Savannah was done by another student. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about your experience with the school and the barriers that may have existed there, or maybe some of the opportunities that existed there because oftentimes, and as a parent who just shared with us, and just like this parent who shared with us, there's a lot of students who, parents who are often not informed by their colleges or universities, based off of what their child has experienced, because, once their child turns 18, they're considered an adult. And so that the rights, under campus sexual assault for parents are non-existent, so to speak, because of that new adulthood that their child has entered in. And so I wonder if you can just share a little bit with us about your experience with the school.
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, I see like one of the comments is that they had to hire an attorney.
Mhm.
We thought we were going to have to go down that path, and I did meet with an attorney because initially, after how horrible the police officer handled, the case, and immediately pulling in like, dorm neighbors and stuff, saying, did you, and they knew nothing about, pulling random people and interrogating them, and Savannah getting these text messages, and she hasn't even, she just told mom and dad. So it was like, okay, wait a minute. The school police that we're paying for needs to also have a division for sexual assault, for rape, because they are acting as just law enforcement. They need to incorporate also the victim and that empathy and that compassion. I understand that it happens a lot, but that does no means for you to become non-emotional. Then when I called the school and I explained to them what happened, because this was, I needed to go and close out her dorm. She didn't want to go to the school. She was terrified of the school. Now her trauma had set in, and her therapist is telling me that, because we finally had found her therapist, and she's like, no, she cannot be there. You're re-traumatizing her. And, they didn't want to let me in, and they're like, well, we have to talk to her. She has to tell us exactly what happened. No, you should not re-traumatize them and make them go back in their mind into that act. That's putting them into PTSD. And you don't do that, and so that was hard, because now I'm having to tell them over and over. And then finally, they're like, well, I'm like, did you guys finally, when I was able to get her grades, I'm like, did you not notice that she was this top, student? I mean, for goodness sake, she came in at 18 as a junior. Did you not see that her second year, she hadn't been in class months? Did anybody do a check-in? They do check-ins for success, student success. They do check-ins when you didn't pay your tuition.
Yes.
But did you do a check-in to say, I haven't seen your student. Are you dropping? And so I was emailing different divisions. I was emailing the dean's office, and then I'd get calls back and they'd say, I'm so sorry, we saw it. And right away I kept hearing, but we are falling under Title IX. I didn't even know what that meant. Nobody educated me. Nobody told me. And so I took it as a threat. Like, they're thinking I'm going to sue them. I just want to help my daughter. I want to figure out how to get rid of her grades. She doesn't want to go back. She's terrified. So I need to figure out, and this is another state. How do I, out of that whole semester, she attended, weeks. So do you guys do anything? Do you give us back housing? What do you do to help with the situation? And a lot of it is, I even got back, well, she needs to write out exactly what happened. Write it. Do you know how difficult that is to just say it, now to write it? So it took me calling around, and finally, I found Iraq by Googling, and a young gal, Mia, said, contact the LGBTQ, because if they don't have, a rape advocacy group, maybe it's through the LGBTQ, and it was, but it wasn't identified. And they were the ones, a survivor, that said, find out about this organization, ask Iraq about this. contact, here's the dean's number for, you know, for this, or this dean for this. And a student had to give me that. It
Mhm.
wasn't on the website, easy to access. I think, you know, our schools need to be more proactive at that. I think we you know, the way we have a community for the LGBT, we need one, you know, that has a volunteer parent support group, volunteer student, even if it's a volunteer professor that's a parent of a survivor, you know, something to be able to be that person to give the phone numbers to. We're not saying we're licensed therapists or counselors or whatever. We're just an advocacy that is loaded with resources from possibly firsthand experience or knowledge from education that can provide that, you know. And then also when you're doing that, you know, they do this whole what do you call it, new student orientation, and they tell you about all the blue lights. Okay, that's great if you can get to a blue light, you know, if someone's after you. But why don't you say this? And if your child feels unsafe, if they've been assaulted, if this has happened, here's this that they can go to, or here's this pamphlet, or here's this anonymous website so that they can get help, you know. That was the one thing. And right away they said, they would ask Savannah, do you know who it is? Can you have to say who it is. You got to tell us, you know, exactly what part. And, you know, they put them in a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in here too, to say that
Oh, I'm sorry,
just like
Susan.
all the
No, you're fine.
okay, no, that colleges and universities vary a lot too, and there's some that really do include parents.
Oh, that's great.
And they do respect what's called the FERPA. It's the federal privacy laws. So they can't tell you specifics, but they can engage parents. To stonewall parents is a disservice to the student. And I included information like this. I don't know if that'll show up in my, no, my book after campus.
Put it in the chat.
Okay, there it is. Okay. But there's a university here in Philadelphia that has trained all of its food service workers.
Oh, that's great.
Because who sees those first-year students every single day, multiple times a day, is going to know when a student is suddenly behaving differently than they usually have. And so there's lots of different ways that people can get involved, that universities are trying to be creative about it, and that parents can get involved. And I think I would encourage you to consider those kind of structural or systemic changes after you've done what you want to do for your child, what you want to do for your family. It's not your responsibility to fix the universities and the colleges. And so I'm not trying to assign that, but I'm saying that it's something but it's something that you can decide to become involved in when the time is right for you.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
But you got to take care of your own home and your own heart first.
Absolutely. And for those of you who may be unaware of Title IX, Title IX essentially is a law that states that any educational institution that receives federal funding must protect their community against sex-based discrimination. And that includes sexual violence and sexual harassment, especially for those who are even a part of the LGBTQ communities. And also Susan had referred to FERPA. FERPA is another law that gives parents and guardians certain rights regarding their children's educational records. So as you're doing your diligence, I wanted to make sure to offer those two things to you. As we are coming up on time, and we did talk a little bit about Title IX and colleges and the resources or lack thereof, and what schools are doing or not doing. I wonder if you both can just share just a couple of recommendations that you may have for especially colleges and universities, parents, especially as we know that the proposed draft of a new Title IX regulation is expected to drop any minute now. And so if you were able to speak to the Department of Education, especially, you know, from the parent perspective, what recommendations would you give to them to ensure that the protections of students, especially students who have a neurodivergence or have a disability, are seen within that regulation?
Georgie, this sounds like one for you to take first.
I think that if I was before the educational board, that I would say first off is that if you don't have a division that supports survivors and I'm talking sexual assault and rape, that you need to establish one, and that you should also have resources for hotlines that have licensed therapists that they can refer to if they wanted to, but also resources for the parents as well, because the parents are going to need assistance on everything from tuition, their child not wanting to go back to college. That's a lot for some parents that I've spoken to. They're like, I feel like they have to, that will heal them. They have to go back. And I'm like, why do they have to right now? Why they don't have to right now? I'm not saying they're not going to, but why do they have to? Or why can't they go online? So I think that there needs to be resources for parents, because sometimes we are so caught up on what we think we know that it's good sometimes to listen to others, because then it allows you to say, okay, reevaluate how you're thinking, and then to reevaluate it, how it affects your child, how your child reacts. So, I think, and if there's already one established, look at it and have a round table with some parents. And I think all the universities have a round table, get some Q&As out there, ask parents, ask survivors that are willing to speak, ask even professors that have students come up to them. So maybe they never experienced it with their own children or themselves, but they have with a student that they got close to. So it's just as traumatic for them. And so have a round table to get these Q&As and say, we're going into the new year. How can we make it better? What more resources are out there? And then also not everybody can afford to pay for therapy. So get some resources for those there is free therapy services out there, free support groups. That is, and also I think that they need to increase the suicide hotline. We had to use it at the very beginning, and we were put on hold twice. And do you know what that's like when you don't know what to do? So those type of things is like, bring on more volunteers, and then really back check some of these volunteers as well. But I think a round table would be great, so that you can get that one-on-one with these people to get their perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Georgie. Susan, how about you?
I would second what Georgie's saying. And now, they have new student orientation. Most colleges and universities also have an orientation for parents now, because they realize that you're taking the whole family in some ways. And so when they have an orientation for new parents, I would encourage the parents, who are the people who are here and listening today, to ask during the parent orientation, how does your campus handle sexual assault? And see what the reaction is. Okay.
I love that.
That's important to make it a topic that can be spoken about. So that's one thing. Also, it's really important as a parent to get accustomed to or knowledgeable about the resources that are there. Colleges and universities have free mental health services for students. Some put a limit on the number of sessions, some don't. But the reality is that is the one place that your child who has been sexually assaulted will not be a first. They have seen lots of students who have been sexually assaulted. They have trainings among the staff. They have all of that sort of stuff. And that is a free resource for the student. If they need something that's more specialized, or they need to bring in somebody else to be able to provide the most appropriate and competent therapy, they can do that. Okay. But most students who have been sexually assaulted don't access any of the services that are available for them for free on campus. So I'd encourage you, because these people know what they're doing. They have a lot of experience doing it. And to circle back, and I'm very mindful of the time, but can your thing of what advice to parents? And I think if there's one thing I would say, it's be the best parent you can be.
Mhm.
Even if you're an attorney, that's not your role here. Even if
Mhm.
you're a therapist, that's not your role here. Your role is to be the best parent you can be. Other people can do those roles, but nobody else can be the mom and can be the dad.
And you're saying, sure, Susan, that not that most universities have like a mental health for free, right? Counselors on staff.
Yes, the services have just
So
expanded.
they're trying to get more and more schools to adopt these free programs in them.
I would say a great majority have them already,
Okay.
and have had them on campus for decades. They started in the 1960s, and so it's been there. And the ones that are there do a lot of training around these issues, because this is a very common thing.
Yeah.
They don't deal with just homesickness, okay?
Right.
Or I got a bad grade. They
Mhm.
deal with traumas like this as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Not all schools provide the services Susan is talking about always in the direct way either. Some may collaborate with off-campus resources and other community-based resources as well, to ensure that they're able to provide these types of resources like mental health resources for their students. As we come to a close, because I know we could honestly continue to talk a little bit more about this, and I had plenty of other questions to ask of Georgie and Susan. I wanted to make sure for folks who are also tuning in, especially as parents who may be looking for a community, I shared this in the chat, but to say it out loud, there is another parent group called Parents Take Action to End Rape on Campus, or PTA EROC. So you can go to their website at ptaeroc.org and find out more information about them, and hear from other parents who have children who've experienced campus sexual assault or off-campus sexual assault from another peer. Let me make that clear. And they'll be able to provide some resources as well, and opportunities for you to speak with other parents who are in their group. I'm also going to reshare some resources via chat that I've been sharing throughout the call, or this conversation rather, especially on exceptional heroes and after campus sexual assault, a guide for parents. We also have a few resources on End Rape on Campus's website as well, for anyone who would like to take a look at that. And as we do come to close, I just want to say thank you so much to Susan and Georgie for sharing your perspective, sharing your insight, providing resources, and just being candid and real about, the nuances that happen and occur, especially from a parent's perspective, and allowing other parents to just learn a little bit more and be open to the fact that there are differences that exist. But in fact, however which way we decide to address campus sexual assault, that we're doing it in the best interest of our child while listening to the child's needs, and what it is that they want to get out of their journey and healing journey. And so one word or maybe a couple words just for like words of advice on self-care for parents, and what they should do for themselves. Georgie, I'll let you go first and then we'll close.
You know what, I say that, listen to your child. We have a slogan here that is listen, love, connect. So listen first, and then that leads in, into that connect with your child, and then your connect with yourself too. So, check on yourself daily while you're going into it, because, there's times you do go into dark and you come back out to light, and you go back into dark, and healing is ongoing. It's not going to ever be finished. It's ongoing, and it's just keeping forward and keeping it going and learning, how to just put time for yourself when you need that mental health day, draw, put on music, take a moment, walk outside, breathe in, some fresh air. And so, that's kind of what I am, and know that it wasn't your fault and it wasn't your child's fault. And that, the main goal is that we're trying to get them to mental safety, physical safety, and emotional safety again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Susan, I'll let you have the last word.
I'd encourage you to take the long view.
Mm.
Because you've been a family together for quite a few years. You'll be a family together in the future. And so work with that foundation, that confidence, because that conveys the hope and the stability that's needed to get through a trauma. And as a parent, sometimes just remember to breathe.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Please look out for more events and resources at nrapeoncampus.org. Thank you again to Susan and Georgie for your perspectives, and thank you all for tuning in with us this afternoon. Take care.